Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're going to be doing part 82, I can't believe we made it that far, of our Planet Zoo mod showcases. So we take a look at some of the wonderful mods that people be making, and we talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got a few remakes, but we got a couple very cool new animals that I'm really excited to talk about. So we're going to be starting off with something very similar to what we started off last time. We're going to be starting off with the Silver Arowana, done by LeafGen and Buffzoo. Little lads here. So, these guys are Silver Arowana. They're a species of South American bony fish, closely related to the Black Arowana. That is often actually sometimes kept in aquariums as well, but they can be predatory and require a large tank. So in terms of their range, they're typically native to the Amazon, the Oyapock, and the Essequibo basins, and they're absent from the Rio Negro basin except for the Braca River, where they share their habitat with the Black Arowana. So these guys actually also occur in both black and whitewater habitats that include flooded forests as well. They're quite generous in that regard. And you can see these guys have quite a long body. They actually get the name kind of dragonfish because they have these large scales that look like the scales on like an East Asian dragon. And they also have a tapered tail with this long body. And they're nearly fused as well. They get quite large as well. Individuals get on average about 3 feet long, 0.9 meters. But there are reports of individuals getting up to 3.9 feet or 1.2 meters. So quite big fish. And unlike the Black Arowana, these guys have the same coloring throughout their lifespan. And adults are very similar, but they can be separated by certain metrics and things like that. And in terms of behavior, very similar to the Black Arowana, other species of Arowana. These guys even get the name the water monkey because they are quite capable of jumping out of the water and capture its prey. And they usually swim near the surface to try and catch their prey. That's why they have that large mouth that opens almost like a drop bridge that allows things to just drop into their mouths. They've been found with birds, bats, mice, and snakes in their stomachs, though their main diet typically consists of crustaceans, insects, smaller fish, and other animals that float along the water surface, which that drawbridge-like mouth is actually adapted to feed on, so that's really, really cool. So in terms of their conservation, they're not really listed as CITES. They're considered pretty common. They're a popular ornamental fish, so that obviously opens up worries about them being over-harvested in their local populations, but they seem to be doing okay at the moment. And as reported by the Environmental News Service in 2005, there was a cause of dispute between the Brazilian and Colombian authorities, with juvenile silver arowana being caught in Colombia and sale for aquariums, while people of Brazil, Amazonia, caught adult fish for food. And the sharp drop in number of arowanas had caused the authorities to kind of like say, hey, you need to settle down there. And yeah, they are pretty much considered, often kept as a pet by aquarists that have enough space and experience, because they're more easier to get than like Asian arowana, because Asian arowana can be quite expensive, and can be expensive as well. But this is kind of like the cheap alternative. Still really, really cool fish, though. Really, really awesome. Not too different from the Black Arowana as well. Again, done by LeafGen and Buffzoo. Did a wonderful job with these fish. Now we've got another like remaster. We're going to a little bit more famous South American fish. I think everyone's kind of favorite. We've got the Red-Bellied Piranha, or just known as the Piranha, done by Leaf Buffzoo and Golem. We've got going on here. Look at these really beautiful little guys here. Really looks beautiful. So these guys are a species of piranha that's native to South America, and they're typically found in the Amazon, the Paraguay, the Panama or Piranha, I believe you say that, and the Essequibo basins, as well as coastal rivers across northeastern Brazil. They're typically quite common in their habitats as well, so that's good, and they're omnivorous, so they typically feed on insects, worms, crustaceans, and fish. And they are not a migratory species, but they do travel to seek conditions that they like, that especially for breeding and spawning during the wet season. And they often travel to schools as a predatory defense, but they really exhibit group hunting behavior, which is kind of a big meme. And we'll get into this, but acoustic communication is actually very common in these guys, and they often use it along with aggressive behaviors, which is really, really cool. So as I mentioned, they typically like to live in freshwater rivers and even downstream in places such as Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Paraguay, Uruguay, Venezuela, places like that, including the Amazon, things like that. They typically live in waters between 15 to 35 degrees Celsius or 59 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, but they're able to survive as temperatures as low as 10 or 50 degrees for a period. They typically are found in white water, but they can be found in clear water or black water, where they live in the major streams, lakes, and pretty much even flooded forests as well. And they were actually introduced in China as part of the aquarium trade, most likely, and they were first detected and become invasive in the country, which is obviously very not good. So these guys are very famous for their reputation of being a ferocious predator that the swarms will, as soon as you stick your toe in, they'll kind of eat you alive kind of thing. But these guys are actually primarily scavengers. And as the name suggests, they kind of get their name, the Red-Bellied Piranha, because they have this red tinge of their belly. It's kind of obvious. And they usually have that when full grown. Their babies typically have that as in silver color. And in terms of their size, they can get up to about 3.9 kilograms or 8 pounds, 10 ounces, and about 50 centimeters or 20 inches in standard length, but they really surpass 35 or 14 inches in standard length, where they're covered in these grey and silver flaked scales, as you can see here, with blackish spots as well. And as they're typically found in whitewater rivers, like that, they live on these large shoals, and they may occasionally engage in feeding frenzies, and usually the cause of a feeding frenzy, they will converge on a large piece of prey, and they will eat it within minutes, but they are usually extremely rare and due to provocation or starvation, so it does happen, but it's very uncommon. And breeding will also occur at about every 2 months period in the raining season, where they can vary in the area, and females will lay up to about 5,000 eggs on nearly submerged vegetation, and the nest will be built by the males. So in terms of their diet, these guys typically feed on insects, worms, crustaceans, and fish, but they've actually been known in packs of hundreds to eat animals as large as capybara and egrets. And despite their reputation, they're actually primarily a scavenger and forager, and they'll actually eat mainly plants and insects, so they're pretty generalist. And they will also only feed on weak, injured, dying, or dead animals in the wild. And they stay in these groups. They do not stay in these groups to pack hunt larger animals, but instead to protect themselves from other predators. And also their foraging methods will change a lot throughout their life. Smaller fish will search for food during the day, while larger fish will come out at night or late afternoon or in the evening. And throughout the day, the fish will lurk in dark areas and ambush prey. And they may also catch prey by hunting and chasing when they lie hid in the vegetation until the prey swims up. It's lots of variation within that. And in terms of reproduction, these guys, we don't really know, with most spawning research being done in aquaria, but we know that they breed about once a year, and the female, as I mentioned, will lay several thousand eggs near water plants. And based on the behavior in nature, it seems like these guys have perfect preferred areas where they like to spawn, and adult piranhas will swim side to side in small circles that will contain two individuals swimming in opposite directions to keep the ventral surfaces, or this surface here, close to each other. Or the ventral, like there, there's the vent there. This formation of mating pairs and this swimming display will also show that they actually have parental care, so they take care of their babies in the nest as young. And left unattended, other fish may prey upon the eggs, so they kind of will defensively circle around these nests to protect them. And they also passively towards other fish that approach the nest, so they just kind of say, "Ugh," and then simply the fact of the parents being there often allows their babies to have a much better chance of survival. So, to talk about some of their schooling, they travel in schools to defend themselves, and in simulations where they test, in studies where they simulated a attack of a predator, they resting opercular rates would return to normal after the shoals of 8 kind of were in a shoal rather than a shoal of 2. So bigger the shoal, the more they feel safe. And there's usually in a defense between a larger predator, such as a caiman, a large fish, or a dolphin potentially. And what's really awesome also in their terms of communication is that they will communicate using biting, chasing, and conspecific confrontations and fighting. And the sounds that they use is generally generated through their sonic muscles that are associated with the swim bladder. So this swim bladder acts as like a resonator and allows them to make these sounds to communicate. And they were often made by when they were held. It can be like, "Hey, leave me alone." They can make sounds ranging from a drumming-like sound to a harmonic, low-frequency sound. though they tend to be associated with specific behaviors. So the harmonic sounds tend to be associated with frontal display behavior between two fish. Type 2 are usually associated with circling and fighting behavior for food competition. And the third type is use a single pulse that lasts about 3 milliseconds and is highly associated with chasing behavior through conpacific, so another individual. And the same sound is also produced when an individual snaps its jaws to bite another. So it's kind of like, hey, 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 telling you, hey, get out of here, you know? And in terms of their conservation status, they are widespread and locally abundant, though they are kind of overfished in some parts of their range. But luckily, they have the collection and eating of these fish is considered low risk to their population. And in terms of aquariums, they're sometimes kept in fish aquariums, where they have fed live fish, frozen food, kind of that. But you've got to be very careful with diseases and things. And people feeding goldfish often will affect the piranha because they have hormone in them that inhibits growth. And you got to be careful also. Fin nipping's a thing, and you also got to keep the water quality high. But other than that, they tend to do okay. And as long as you have the right setup and everything, kind of like fish in general, they tend to be very hard to keep in aquariums, or just very needy. But yeah, really, really awesome. Again, done by Leaf, Buffzoo, and Bit Golem. Next, we've got another fish from the Amazon. So it's kind of themed to the Amazon today. We've got 4 fish from the Amazon, I believe. Yeah. So we've got the Piraiba. So a really interesting big fish that we got here. So the scientific name is Brachyplastroma filamentorum. So that's their full scientific name, or they're called the kuma kuma. These guys are a species, as you could tell, of very large catfish that are native to the Amazon and Orinoco river basins, as well as areas in Guyana and northeastern Brazil. So I mentioned they're very widespread, but one of their biggest features is that they're incredibly large. You can see they grew up to a length of about 2.8 meters, and the largest Amazon Piraiba recorded was about 2 to 2.5 meters and weighed more than 150 kilograms, so quite large. And you can see their dorsum is kind of dark with this to light grey, as you can see with the counter shading there. The dorsal fin's got a little bit of a pink shading as well. And juveniles will have black spots or plotches, but you can't really see that here. And they're entirely piscivorous, so they prey on other bottom-dwelling fish and things like that. And these guys typically live in fresh and brackish water systems, and they're actually called polyamorous, and they commonly inhabit places like deeper flowing channels with soft bottoms. That's what kind of habitats they like. And though they are absolutely massive species, as you can see here, they're sometimes considered a game fish or a commercial fish, and they're generally harmless, but they're known to be a obligate piscivore, so they're known to only eat other fish. However, some stomach contents is said to include that of monkeys, so they are most likely much more general than we assume. So very likely they'll just eat whatever they can get their mouths around, be it a monkey, being it a clam, being it a fish. They just go for it. Kind of those kind of fish. You can't be picky out in the Amazon. But yeah, look how beautiful they are. Just such a large fish and really, really beautiful. Awesome, awesome fish. Again, done by Buffzoo, GiornoPizza, and Fishing Planet. So a lot of these models are ports from other games. Fishing Planet's a great example. Endless Ocean, Beyond Blue, those kind of games tend to be a lot of where these ports come from. But yeah, next we're going to be moving on to the red-tailed catfish. So a really awesome fish that we got going on here. Again, having a good swim there. I think we'll try and find one that's swimming around. So the red-tailed catfish, as you can see, they're a long-whiskered catfish, where they're known in Venezuela as the cajaro, or in Brazil, the Piraiba, I believe you say that. I don't really know how to say that. But yeah, these guys are very interesting fish. They, as I mentioned, they're kind of found all across the tropical areas and rivers of South America and Central America, and they can get quite large. They can get to about 1.8 meters or 5 feet 11 inches in length and weigh up to about 80 kilograms, though this is extremely rare, and they most average out at about 3'6" to 4'6", or 1.1 to 1.4 meters in length. And you can see they get their name, the red-tailed catfish, from this quite red tail that they've got here, but they've also got this really nice pattern to them, with like this blotchy pattern of like browns and dark blacks, along with some counter shading along their tail there. And the white going on down there. Really, really interesting fish. And they also have these long whiskers that have chemical receptors, and they're sensitive, so they're used as a sense of smell. And similar to other fish, they will breed using external fertilization after laying their eggs. And they also will communicate, making a clicking sound that usually is used to warn of potential dangers to other fish, which is pretty interesting. So as I mentioned, these guys are kind of native to the Amazon, Orinoco, and Essequibo regions, like Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Brazil, places like that, where they're only found in freshwater and will inhabit large streams, lakes, etc. They eat during the evening, and at night they stay motionless during the day. They are bottom feeders that move around quite quickly, quite slowly. And they're quite territorial as well, so you got to be careful. They're also known as an invasive species in Malaysia and are now found in the Perak River and the Panghanong River. So you guys doing okay? You're kind of not swimming. Let's see if we'll see if this guy swims. He should keep swimming. But yeah, in terms of their relationship to humans, because they get so potentially large, they're kind of considered a game fish, with the largest one found being about 56 kilograms, 123 pounds, 7 ounces. And the natives do not actually eat the meat because it's black in coloration. And in Thailand, they're considered an alien species that have been introduced, like the alligator gar, the pleco, and the zebra tilapia. And in some places, it's feared that these guys have been the cause of mysterious drownings, which is kind of interesting too. But yeah, in terms of the ecology, they're kind of large fish. They use their power to suck up anything that can really get their mouths around. Very generalist in that regard. And in terms of being an aquarium fish, these guys are quite popular, especially in like Amazon-themed exhibits and public aquariums. People even have them as tanks as well, where they're often housed with lots of other large fish like pacus and other large catfish. But because they get so large, often people will buy them as juveniles and they grow quite rapidly. People are like, what the heck do we do? And a weekly feeding is typically considered appropriate for the species, and if you feed them too much, they can get overweight and die. Even juveniles are only a few inches in length. They can swallow many of the most common aquarium fish, like guppies and stuff. So they only if you're going to have them with fish, only have them with fish like of a relatively large sizes with them. And they've actually been known to hybridize with tiger Chauvinot's catfish through the use of hormones, and they actually attempt to create a viable food fish, the tiger red-tailed catfish. And this hybrid fish is sometimes found in the aquariums and under various names like tiger cat, things like that. But yeah, really, really wonderful little fish here. So that's 2 catfish. We're going to move to our last catfish. This one was done by Leaf, Buffzoo, and Fishing Simulator, so it comes from then. Our last fish for today, we have got the Wels catfish. So these guys, also known as just the Wels, very interesting catfish. They're native to areas of Central, Southern, and Eastern Asia. Europe, and they can be found in the Baltic, Black, and Caspian Seas, and have been actually introduced into Western Europe and can be found in the United Kingdom as a sport fish. So these guys, they have large mouths with lots of small teeth, with these 2 long barbules that they use to feel around, similar to the red-tailed catfish. They have long bodies with a short dorsal fin and all that. They're very eel-like in that regard. And they also exhibit tetum lucidum, which actually provides their eyes with some sensitivity to the night, so they can kind of see during the night as well. And they have these sharp pectoral fins that allow them to create little eddies and things to help them disorient its victims, which is very cool. And they have a very slimy skin with this kind of mottled pattern that helps them camouflage as well. In terms of reproduction, these guys produce up to 30,000 eggs per kilogram of body weight, so they make a lot of eggs. And the males will guard the nest until they hatch, and which, depending on water temperature, can take 3 to 10 days. And if the water level decreases too much or too fast, the males has been observed to splash the eggs with its tail to keep them wet. So, as you can see here, they're quite a large fish. Their total length possibly exceeds up to about 3 meters or 9.8 feet, and a maximum weight of over 200 kilograms or 440 pounds. They're considered the second largest freshwater fish in Europe and Western Asia, just after the largest, pretty much one of the largest freshwater fish, the beluga sturgeon. So, but these sizes are quite rare and unproven, but a more likely average is potentially about 1.3 to 1.6 meters or 4 to 5 feet long. Fish longer than 2 meters are pretty rare, and at about that 4'11", they get about 50 to 20 kilos, and at 2 meters, at 7 feet, they can get about 65 kilos. but they only really reach those big 2-3 meter long sizes in extremely good conditions. And some of them may be found like Germany, Poland, Italy, places like that, in Greece as well. And they've actually been observed thriving in the cooling ponds in the damaged Chernobyl nuclear power plant as well. And although popularly believed they mutate into large sizes of the fallout, you know how people are with radioactive stuff, these guys actually might just be growing bigger and better because they aren't getting hounded by humans a lot. And hunting and fishing has been outlawed in this exclusion zone following that accident, though, as well as being provided by food by generous tourists. So that perfect condition of people leaving them alone except to feed them food, these guys have gotten pretty large. In terms of their diet, they're usually a bottom feeder, so they typically feed on worms, gastropods, insects, crustaceans, and fish, but they have been observed to eat frogs, mice, rats, aquatic birds such as ducks, and also can be cannibalistic, and there have been records of them hunting birds and things like that, which is really interesting. And in terms of their ecology, these guys like to live in large, warm lakes with deep, slow-flowing rivers. And they preferred sheltered locations such as holes in riverbeds or sunken trees, etc., where they like to kind of hang out and do their thing. And their Wels catfish can be kept in fish ponds as food fish as well. And in terms of their conservation status, they're not known to be globally endangered, and their conservation status really varies across their range. In lots of places they're invasive, some places that they are declined a lot. So places such as Norway and Finland, they went extinct in the 1700s and 1800s respectively. And in Sweden, only a few persist in their lakes, but they're now considered near threatened. Genetic studies also show that these populations have low genetic diversity and are genetically isolated and differentiated from each other. That highlights the need for their conservation. So most areas are doing okay. Some areas are invasive, some they're struggling and extinct there. So really, they're doing a mixed bag across the board, but they're doing all right. So there have been actually some reports of them attacking people, but it's kind of really, really weird. So they've had an Austrian fisherman in 2009 that had been attacked by catfish in Hungary, basically tried to suck him in, but he managed to get free. And in terms of their other interaction with people, they tend to be quite common fish to eat. Only the flesh of young Wels catfish are palatable. To be less than 15 kgs to be well eaten. And larger than that size, they tend to be highly fatty and tend to be loaded with toxic contaminants because of bioaccumulation, because of their position in the food chain. So anything less than 15 kilos is considered safe to eat. But yeah, really, really awesome fish. I'm a big fan of these big catfish. So really awesome Wels. Nice to see some new mods again. These guys were done by, as I mentioned, Leaf Buffzoo, Ultimate Fishing Simulator, and some other guy I can't read. Oh, wait, no. Fishing Planet, Buffzoo, and GiornoPizza. That's who did the catfish and coded it and all that. So next we're moving on from some fish, we're moving on to some reptiles. So we've got two reptiles today. One's a bird, one's a lizard. We have got here, starting off with Vincible, we've got the laced monitor. So another one in his cool monitor lists. So these guys are a species of monitor lizard that are found in eastern Australia. And they are quite large. They can get up to about 2 meters or 6'6" and weigh up to 14 kilograms or 31 pounds. So in terms of their description, they're the second largest monitor in Australia, second only to the Piranha, and they can reach 2 meters or 7 feet in total length, or about 76 centimeters snout to vent length. So that's from the tip of their snout to their vent at the base of the tail here. And they get up to about 14 kilograms. The males typically reach sexual maturity at about 41 centimeters, and females are generally smaller than the females. Females are generally smaller than the males, with a maximum snout to vent length of about 57.5 centimeters, and they become sexually mature at about 38 for females. And they have this very long, slender tail that's about 1 times the length of its body, and they have these very interesting patternings on them. They mainly come in these two forms, so there is like this dark or grey black phase, which is like cream colored, things like that, and the head is black as you see here. And then there's another type which is known as the Bell's phase, which was actually described as another species of monitor until it was found to be just a color morph. This is called the Bell's form. This is typically found in Queensland or the Great Dividing Range in New South Wales as well. They typically have a base color of yellow to brown with these fine mottled patterning with darker brown bands from the shadows head to tail, with the top of the head being black. So this is kind of a mix of that. This is probably more like a Bell's phase, as you can kind of see here. And in terms of the distribution habitat, as I mentioned, these guys are terrestrial and often arboreal, so they like to hang out in trees. They're found in eastern Australia and range from Cape Bedford to Cape York Peninsula to southeastern Australia. South Australia, I mean, and they're typically found in open and closed forest and forage over large distances. Luckily, these guys are considered least concerned because they're quite common, and they're mainly active between September and May, but inactive in cooler weather and shelter in tree hollows and under fallen trees and large rocks to get out of the cooler weather. Despite their large size, as I mentioned, they're adept climbers, and the one was actually recorded climbing a brick wall to seek shelter in a thunderstorm. And young lace monitors are even more arboreal, and they use this to avoid living with the adults. And they often spend most of their adult life in the same area. So in terms of reproduction, the breeding range typically takes place in the summer, and male lace monitors will fight each other by getting up and grasping each other while standing their hind legs and trying to fight each other. And then once the lucky one gets the female. And females will actually lay an average of 8 eggs into an active termite mound or on the ground or in the trees. Typically, it's kind of wherever. But they may lay as many as 12 eggs. With nests in such short supply, the females will often fight over them and lay their eggs in burrows and perhaps hollow logs as well. The eggs overwinter and hatch 6 to 7 months later. Hatchlings remain in the nest for about a week or so before leaving the vicinity, and the females may actually return to the same termite nest to lay the next clutch of eggs. And these monitors can live quite long. They can potentially live to be over 20 years old. So in terms of feeding, these guys primarily eat carrion, but they will eat larger animals as well. They're kind of on a seafood diet, so they seafood, they eat it. They typically will eat insects, reptiles, small mammals, birds with eggs as well, and young birds, and mammals taking up a larger part of their diet in the spring to early summer. And there was actually a 2012 study that showed populations of monitor lizards near two rubbish tips were 35 times greater, with individuals about twice as heavy than populations in natural forests. And that's also pretty interesting. And these lizards near rubbish dumps were typically females. There was basically 5 males for each female, compared to 1.9 males per female in natural areas, so there seem to be a lot of big males hanging around there. And though they don't really have predators, they can get killed by dingoes and crocodiles, and they are a traditional food source for aboriginals. We'll have a look at the babies, since I forgot to talk about the babies. Look how cute the little babies are. But yeah, and those actually often swallow the meat whole. They can often risk of harm for some meat scratch. There was one was reported with a T-bone steak stuck in its throat, another with a plastic fork, which is very interesting. And they actually frequently attack the large composting nests of scrub turkeys and steal their eggs, and they often show injuries from the male turkeys pecking them to drive them away, which is pretty interesting. And like other monitors, they are very adept are venomous, so they have venom glands in their lower jaw that they use to bite down on prey that can cause swelling and that lasts for several hours, things like that, which is also really cool. And another thing as well, they declined in numbers when the species encountered the cane toad, but however, lace monitors were abundant in some areas where they've been established, so it seems that some of them might be learning to avoid the toads, so it might be doing well. But also, the lace monitor was eaten by the Wajuri people, with local wisdom advising that eating these, they came down from the trees. Those that have eaten the ground tasted of rotting meat, so they basically ate them, eating them as they came down from the trees. And they also ate the eggs as well, and they are often bred in captivity as exotic pet and kept in captivity as well. Very, very cool. Very cute little guys as well, done by Vincible. Really did a wonderful job depicting this really cool animal. But yeah, next we're moving on to the next reptile. We have got the great blue heron, done by Ginger Toast. Really, really awesome. So look at these wonderful guys. The great blue heron is a large wading bird of the family of the herons, and they are found commonly around shores of open water and wetlands over most of North America and Central America, and they've been found in the Caribbean and the Galapagos Islands, where they're a rare vagrant also to Spain, the Azores, and also Southern Europe. And an all-white population is known from South Florida and the Florida Keys. That is known as the great white heron, but that's only all-white populations. You can say it's a subspecies, but a lot of people disagree there. But these guys are famous for being like the largest native heron to North America. And they're only surpassed in size by the Goliath heron and the white-bellied heron. And they also exhibit a minor degree of sexual dimorphism, with males being slightly larger than the females. But otherwise, they're not really too hard to tell apart. They're pretty hard to tell apart from each other. So, a head to tail length is typically about 91 to 137 centimeters, so 36 to 54 inches, with a wingspan of 167 to 201 centimeters, or 66 to 79 inches, and typically their height's about 115 to 138 centimeters, or 45 to 54 inches, and their weight is typically about 182 to 1.82 and 3.6 kilograms, or 4 to 7.9 pounds. With some areas they get a little bit larger than that. They average about 2.5 kilograms. And you can see some of their most notable features here. That you can see they got this like grayish blue look to them. They can see they're named the Great Blue Heron. And they also have these two plumes coming off their lower neck as well. That really makes them look like they get them a nice profile as well. And they look like a bit ornery, which is very interesting. And in terms of their distribution as habitat, I mentioned that they're pretty much found across America and parts of South America as well. They can be found from Alaska and the southern Canadian provinces during the winter, and even far north as Alaska during the summer. And in winter, they will live down Florida, Mexico, Caribbean, and also, as I mentioned, they even get to as south as the Galapagos Islands. And the Great Blue Heron, they typically can live in any wetland habitat. As long as there's water, they'll be fine. And they're typically found across marshes, mangroves, flooded meadows, lake edges, and shorelines. And they actually really venture far from bodies of water, but they're occasionally being seen fly over upland areas. And they usually nest in trees and bushes near the water's edge, or isolated spots. And they have been recorded as a vagrant in England, Greenland, Hawaii, and the Azores. So these guys, in terms of their diet, they typically eat small fish, but they will eat like things shrimp, crayfish, insects, small mammals, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and even ducklings as well. They're very, very generous in that regard. And they usually use their sight to try and find their prey, and they will kind of, similar to other herons, they'll kind of grab it and then swallow it whole, and they're solitary feeders, so they typically walk around looking for things. Very interesting. And they're actually capable of feeding in deeper waters as well, being a large heron. And these guys will feed in shallow waters up to less than 50 centimeters deep, or at the water's edge, and they use that and kind of just go grab and rip it away. But yeah, really, really awesome. So this species as well breeds in colonies in trees close to wetlands and lakes, and they generally return to a colony site after for December in warmer climates, or March in colder areas like Canada. Usually these colonies will only include herons, but they may nest alongside other species sometimes, and it's typically called a heronry or a rookery sometimes. And the size of these colonies can be between 5 to 500 nests, with an average about 160 nests per colony. And they're usually quite close to each other, within about 4 or 5 kilometers, and ideal feeding spots, things like that. So these nests also may be reused by many years, and they're socially monogamous within a single breeding season, but they choose a new mate each year, so they'll pick a new mate every year, so they get basically all the time new ones, which is funny. And they generally build these big nests that can be up to 50 centimeters across when first constructed, can grow up to about 120 centimeters or 47 inches or 90 centimeters deep with additional construction over time. And if the nest is abandoned and destroyed, they may lay a replacement clutch as well, though their reproduction is negatively affected by humans because, especially during the beginning of nesting, with human intrusions will often result in them abandoning the eggs and chicks and things like that. But generally they tend to not abandon them too much, just don't disturb them. They typically lay about 3 to 6 pale blue eggs, and these eggs can weigh between 61 to 80 grams or 2.2 to 2.8 ounces, with one brood raised each year. The smallest eggs are actually often considered the runt eggs that are too small to produce viable young. So they're usually laid between 2-day intervals, and they're incubated about 27 days, and they will hatch over a period of about several days, with males incubating about 10.5 hours each day, while the females usually incubate the remainder of each day and night, with eggs left without incubation for about 6 minutes for each hour. So they typically are quite well incubated. So the first chick usually becomes the most experienced in food handling, aggressive with its siblings, and usually grows more quickly. So typically you're the first out, you're the one that gets the most food. And they will feed their babies by regurgitating food, so they regurgitate into their mouth. And parent birds have shown to consume up to 4 times as much food when feeding young chicks than when laying or incubating eggs as well. And by the time the 45 days old, the young will actually weigh about 86% of their adult's body mass. And after 55 days in the northern part of the range, Alberta, and 80 days in California, young herons will take the first flight, and then they will return to the nest to be fed about 3 weeks. And then they finally will be fully fledged and go off and fly away about their first 2 months of age. And in terms of predation, these guys are commonly preyed upon as eggs and nestlings by vultures, crows, raccoons, crows, bears, things like that. But as adults, they have few natural predators, but that includes bird eagles, golden eagles, great horned owls, and harris hawks as well. And the occasional adult heron may actually be snatched by a crocodile or an alligator, which is also very weird to see. But generally, they tend to be okay. And in terms of their conservation, they're considered least concerned because they're quite common and live across a large range. And very, very cool bird. Again, done by Ginger Toast. Did a wonderful job. So we're done with our reptiles. Now we're moving on to the mammals. So we got here the lesser capybara, done by Narwhaler, who remade it to fit the capybara from the wetland pack. So we have the lesser capybara, which is a large semi-aquatic rodent from the family Caviidae, so related to cavies, such like the greater capybara, chinchillas, things like that. Guinea pigs is another example. They're typically found in eastern Panama, northwestern Colombia, and western Venezuela. So these guys were described as their own species in 1912, but they were later reclassified as a subspecies of capybara. But since then, they have been re-recognized as a separate species. So now they're mostly considered their own species, but sometimes as a subspecies. But for the most part, they're generally considered their own thing, which is pretty cool. They're very not that different, as you can see, to the greater capybara. The main difference typically is their size. Adult capybaras get about 28 kilograms or 62 pounds. Adult lesser capybaras, typically about 28 kilograms or 60 pounds, while adult greater capybaras typically get about 35 kilograms or 77 pounds, and often can be much more than that. So typically they breed year-round sometimes, and they have an average litter of about 3.5, and individuals may be diurnal or nocturnal or social and solitary, depending on a lot of factors such as seasons, habitat, and hunting pressure. And they've been actually reported to be quite common in Panama, but rare in Venezuela. And they are threatened by subsistence hunting and the destruction of the gallery forests and swamp drainage that they like to live in. So they are considered data deficient. But they seem to be doing okay, but they might need a little bit of help just from habitat degradation, like most species around the world kind of do these days. Look, we'll have a look at the cheeky albino. That's really, really awesome. Really nice to see a remake of one of the kind of lesser appreciated mods. I do love myself a nice capybara. How can you not love capybara? So last but certainly not least, we have got the Ogna, the last mammal, from Narwhaler again, doing a wonderful job. So this is the Ogna, also known as the Asiatic wild ass, or the Himoin. These guys are a member of the Equidae, so they're type of horse. They're native to Asia. And there's 5 subspecies, with 2 of them being considered extinct. So this is, I believe, the Mongolian wild ass. So this is a subspecies, a dominant subspecies as described. But there's also the Turkmenistan kulan, or the Persian ognar, which I've already covered before. The Indian wild ass, the extinct Syrian wild ass, and the European wild ass, which was formerly considered a distinct species, but has been considered a subspecies of ognar in 2017. So pretty interesting. So this one, we're covering the Mongolian wild ass, which is the dominant subspecies. So in terms of characteristics, considering like most other horses or asses, they're most horse-like, as you can see here. They have short legs compared to horses, and their colors can vary a lot between season and things like that. They're generally this reddish-brown, as you can see, during the summer, or they become yellowish-brown or grayish-brown during the winter. They have a black stripe bordering its white that extends down the middle of its back, as you can kind of see here, this black stripe here. The belly and rump are also white, and in most ognars, except the Mongolian wild ass, it has this broad dorsal stripe bordering the white, which is also pretty cool. And they're quite a bit larger than donkeys. They typically get about 200 to 290 kilograms or 440 to 640 pounds in weight, and about 2.1 to 2.5 meters or 6.9 to 8.2 feet in head to body length. And males are typically a little bit larger than the females. So in terms of their distribution and habitat, they used to be quite common. They tend to live desert plains, deserts, grasslands, savannas, scrublands, mountain ranges, steppes, things like that. The Turkmenistan and Mongolian wild ass typically live in hot and cooler climates. And the IUCN estimates there's about 28,000 mature individuals in the wild, which makes them near threatened. So they're quite a bit numbered, but they're obviously threatened because they're a large animal. During the late Pleistocene, or about 40,000 years ago, they ranged pretty much across Europe and to South and Southwestern and Northeastern Asia, but they've become regionally extinct in Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, and the southern reaches of Siberia. The Mongolian wild ass lives in the inner reaches of Mongolia, and a few live in China as well, but they typically kind of decreased as well. They're considered the most common subspecies, but their populations have decreased to a few thousand due to lots of poaching and things like that, which sucks, but of course. The Indian wild ass is actually also found throughout arid parts of Pakistan and India, and about 4,500 are known from a few centuries, such as Jurat as well. And the Persian Ognar is from two subpopulations in southern and northern Iraq, with the larger population found in the Kar-Turan National Park, which is, though it has been extirpated from Afghanistan. So, very similar to most equids, these guys are social animals. We'll have a look at the females while we talk about their sociality. So, stallions are either solitary or they live in groups of about 2 to 3. The males have been observed holding harems of females, but other studies show that the dominant male will actually defend territories that attract females. So differences of behavior likely can be changes due to hunting, predation, like climate and vegetation cover, things like that. Their social behavior can vary wildly depending on where they live. So in Mongolia and Central Asia, they typically have a harem-type social group with several mares and foals living in a large home range, or in the southwest, or territory-based in the south and southeast. It just kind of depends on where you are. Young males also frequently form bachelor groups, and it's quite similar to see in wild horses, plain zebras, and mountain zebras, so kind of similar in that regard. Southern populations, though, typically have, around Middle East and South Asia, they are purely territorial, so these areas partly overlap with dominant stallions having a home range of about 9 kilometers, or 3.5 square miles. They can be much larger, where these guys will have food sources, water stuff that attract stallions, mares, I think that's proper, yeah. And they're also kind of similar to African wild asses and things like that. So in terms of reproduction, these guys, we'll have a look at the cute little foals as we talk about them. Look at these cute little guys. Really, really wonderful. So in terms of sexual maturity, they reach sexual maturity at about 2 years old, and the first mating usually take place about 3 to 4 years old. And the breeding is seasonal, and the gestation period is about 11 months, with the birth lasting no more than 10 minutes. Mating and birth typically will occur from April to September, with an acclimation from June to July. The mating season in India is the raining season, and females will tend to, with young, timidly form groups of up to 5 individuals. And during rearing, a foal and dam remain close together, but other animals and their older offspring are also displayed in the dam as well. And occasionally, stallions and territorial wild populations will expel the young to mate with the mare again. And they reach an age of about 14 years old in the wild, but in captivity, they can live up to about 26 years. So quite long-lived and quite a long life for this cute little guy here. So let's see, have a look at another one. So in terms of the diet, they're herbivorous, of course. So they typically feed on herbs, grasses, fruits. In winter, they'll also eat snow as a substitute for water. And when natural water sources are unavailable, they will dig holes in riverbeds to reach subsurface water. And the water holes are often visited by domestic livestock, which is pretty cool. Okay. But, yeah, herbivorous, feed on woody plants, all that. So, the Ognar is preyed upon by animals such as striped hyenas and Persian leopards. And a few cases of Ognar deaths during Iran. Though leopards do not frequently eat them, they are sometimes usually fed on equids in Africa as well. And in the Middle East, Asiatic lions they're the main predators, but they've mainly kind of gone extinct. Though, well, most areas they've kind of gone extinct, but there are areas that still have tigers and Asiatic lions that will prey upon them. They'll also get eaten by dholes, cheetahs, bears, foals. They'll usually only prey on the foals, though, and in India, mugger crocodiles will eat them as well. And the main predator for these guys around most of their range are actually grey wolves. Though, however, like most equids, they actually have anti-predatory behaviors such as groups of stallions that will cooperate and try to chase off predators, and if threatened, they will kick and violently scream and kind of defend themselves doing that. Kind of like, you know, how your typical horse would. So in terms of threats, these guys, their biggest threats are poaching for their meats and hides and also for traditional medicines. Overgrazing by domestic livestock also hurts them a lot, and droughts can be a big thing. Habitat loss and fragmentation is also quite a big threat. And also another one is disease. So a disease known as South African horse sickness has caused a major decline in the Indian wild ass populations in the 1960s, though they're no longer under threat of that and have been increasing in number, though they're all get worse. But in terms of conservation, various breeding subspecies of Onager to try and help the population and increase their population as well. They're legally protected in many countries where they are, and the priority for future conservation methods make sure that they're protected as well, so they have a lot of areas to live and grow into, as well as encouragement of getting local people involved in conservation and to conduct further research into their ecology, behavior, taxonomy, all that. With two subspecies, the Persian Ognar and the Turkmenistan Kulan, have actually been reintroduced into their former range as well, including the other regions, the Syrian wild ass to the east. These two species have been reintroduced in the wild since 1982 and have been breeding hybrids there as well, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, very, very cool animal. Yeah, awesome. So I think Narwhaler's done. Yeah, dropped all your models. So I really hope you guys enjoyed. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye bye.